I passed this huge burly beast with a big gun. I just called everybody and said, help, we're in the middle of quite a large thing.
Guess what?
And at the moment we're still in here, but could someone please call me back?
Welcome to the Secret Diary Producer podcast, where we go behind some of the biggest shows and pieces of content on TV and the internet, because the story behind the show or behind the content is often just as compelling as the show itself. If the beginning of the 21st century, or the end of beginning of the 21st was the golden age for drama in the US, I think the late 2010s and into the early 2020s has also been the golden age of the documentary. And part of that has been the influence of the streamers like Netflix and Amazon, who have invested heavily in big docs, the greatest story with all the people you want to hear from. It has transformed the whole genre. One of the best documentary series of the last 10 years, as far as I'm concerned, was not on one of the streamers, it's actually on BBC Two. It was called Hospital. It was an incredibly brilliantly observed medical obdoc. But what it did for the first time is it went behind the stories of the patients. That was a big part of it, but it also told the story of the institutions, the managers, the people who were trying to make incredibly difficult decisions with resources on a daily basis. And it was something we hadn't seen before. It was essentially the NHS, warts and all. We all look for those moments in TV programs where we can say, what would I do? What would my decision be? But normally they're related to perhaps game shows or factual entertainment series. But what Hospital did was it made those conversations about, if I were faced with this life or death decision, where would I place myself? Would I go for that new drug, even though it was going to cost me £10,000, or would I go for this different piece of treatment? It also took experts. We all go into hospital thinking, well, the experts will know, they'll heal us. They hold the answers. For the first time, it said, well, they don't always hold the answers. They are human beings like us trying to deal with these issues with the resources that they have, and they don't hold the answers. Ultimately, nobody is coming to save you. You have to make those decisions on your own. And it was incredibly powerful, compelling television. I'd say one of the reasons why I love it so much is because it conveys humanity in a way which is extremely difficult to capture on film. And particularly when you're trying to do something very, very quickly. Remember, Hospital went out not long after it was filmed, so it was very contemporaneous. It was on the money at the time, and it really filled the zeitgeist. In this episode of the podcast, I'm delighted to be talking to one of the three executive producers, Jackie Waldock. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, Ed.
I don't really need to say hi to you because we're already working on a Hospital program together, so it's kind of like deja vu.
Oh.
So I had the pleasure, in preparation for this podcast, of watching another episode of Hospital, because I haven't watched it for a while. It's kind of divine television, really, I think. I mean, obviously the content is often a hard watch and the stories are really hard. But when I say divine, I mean just in terms of the storytelling, the observation, which is kind of extraordinary, and just how each case sort of draws you into a different aspect of the challenges focused on the NHS. I mean, if you were to contrast it to some other medical series, often they tend to be more one-dimensional in that you might get the story of whatever the operation is, perhaps a bit of the patient, and that's kind of it. And maybe something of the surgeon or doctor. But in this, you're getting the surgery, the personal story, and then the layers of opportunity cost. Like, if we do this, we can't do this. If we give you that, we can't give you that goes through, which is just, it's like very real and a very authentic version of the NHS. So I'm watching again, I'm thinking, how did this, I know you weren't there for series 1, you joined in series 2, but how did this sort of come into being? Like, what was the kind of, what do you know what this sort of idea behind it was originally and how it sort of manifested?
So Lorraine and Simon, who ran Label One very successfully, worked with the BBC at the time, and the BBC said to them, and to others, I think, as well at the time, we need something different about the NHS. And so they set off to find it, and they got access to Imperial Healthcare Trust, which, in London, St Mary's is the big hospital in Paddington, Charing Cross, Hammersmith, and I think so they've told me, they weren't too sure either what they were looking for. But they definitely had an idea that what we weren't seeing was behind the scenes. We were seeing patients, we were seeing surgery, but we weren't seeing all those really difficult decisions behind the scenes. And what you hear of constantly in the press is, the management, blah, 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 we should get rid of all the managers, da, 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 da. But actually, who are these people and what are the huge issues and resource problems that they're trying to grapple with? So I think that's, as far as I know, the gestation of it, and I know that when they went into the edit with series 1, they still weren't sure what they'd really got, and it was a real grappling with it to see. And actually they had got that, and they had got it in spades, and they'd got this incredible series, which for the first time, I think, ever really went behind the scenes and said, here is this huge trust serving, millions of people, central London. It's one of the 4 hospitals for the trauma network as well. There's a huge amount going on here. And it was looking at all the decision making, as well as giving the audience those incredible human stories of patients and their surgeons to pull you in.
Yeah. So, and that, which then begs the question is how do you get to that point in terms of access? Because we've all had the access conversations where we say, well, we're looking to do this or we're looking to do that, whatever it might be. And then there's always the kind of question, is it warts and all? And usually if you say it's warts and all, so whether it's a private limited company or a charity or a business or whatever it might be, they tend to sort of be like, rather not, thank you very much. And when you're the NHS, you're a publicly funded body. That's a really hard decision to make and then deliver and persuade all the people in the institution to deliver for you. How did you approach that, and how did you get them to open up and trust you in that kind of way? Because that's what's so extraordinary about it, the heart of it, isn't it?
It is. I think the first series, again, from what I know, but I think the NHS at this point were they'd been beaten a bit, and they were feeling very under-resourced and understaffed and underappreciated by certainly the government and possibly by a lot of people, patients, etc. And I think they wanted to say, actually, look what we're facing. I think by that point, they'd got to a point where they were saying, we really want you to see the reality of what we're facing.
Yeah.
And I think also it was the bravery of the head of comms and other people at that hospital who took an incredibly courageous step to allow them to come in and allow us to continue, because we did the second series there as well, to say, actually, we're going to step outside the box and we are going to take a risk, because we really, really, and I think they particularly wanted patients to understand that when they're struggling with the list, cancelling people, not able to get people through A&E really quickly, I think they really wanted people to understand it wasn't because they didn't want to, it wasn't because they weren't trying incredibly hard, but they were facing a barrage of problems.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we grew with every single trust that we approached. It was amazing how actually open they were with us, generally speaking, and how much they wanted to do it. I think they also wanted to say, look, we are doing brilliant things, quite rightly. We are treating an incredible amount of patients with complicated issues. Yet at the same time, we're having to balance all this. And I think they were really wanting to show both sides of that coin. We maybe just hit the zeitgeist at the right moment, and they were desperate to get out there and say, look at us.
Yeah. I mean, that comms director was seriously courageous to do that, because it was very much putting the neck out. But it paid off massively, because I always think of it a bit like when you're on the tube, if you get stuck in a tunnel and you don't know why, and you just sit there, you just get angrier and angrier, and it's hot, whatever it might be. But if someone comes on every 2 minutes or 3 minutes and says, hi, there's a train up ahead, someone's fainted, we're just trying to get them off and do it, we'll go as soon as we can, you kind of go, oh, that's all right then. And it was a bit like that with the NHS. Instead of going in and just saying, oh, the bloody NHS, blah, 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 now you felt like you could see all those kind of cogs behind it, and suddenly it made sense, and you could have this compassion and empathy for what was being delivered in very, very difficult circumstances. And there was a scene in the episode I watched last night when so one of the things that it tackled was private healthcare wards in public hospitals, and it did it really, really intelligently and really, really well. And there's a question to the surgeon, and the director says, are you visiting her a bit more because she is on the private ward? And he pauses for a moment and he says, yes, probably. And you just think, wow. I mean, that is a brave thing to say, and it's a very dynamic moment. But then presenting the way that it works so well is presenting both sides of it. This is why we need to do it. We get 30% uplift on private patients, which helps the rest of the hospital. It makes you more sympathetic towards it. So my next question for you was, so the comms director said, yes, let's do this. This is da 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 da, and then you're going in and you're working with lots of people. Like we know from the one that we're doing that there's hundreds of people involved in it, and they're not all going to sign up to it. They won't all want to be in camera, and that's why we get some blurred faces. How did you go about convincing all the key people to really to open up in that kind of a way, and be very serious, impressive people?
I think in the first instance, the first series, certainly they went in with, very, very good protocols, very clear protocols, that said, look, we're not going to screw you around. Here's where we are. Trust us, and you can talk to us and you can communicate with us. And we really aren't here to, do a panorama or whatever it might be, an investigative piece on you. We're here to, show you, but it will be warts and all. And it's always that classic event. Also, you can watch the films, and that was offered right from the get-go. Certainly when I came on board and I was offered an exec producer role on the second series, I had never exec produced. I'd been an SP for quite a few years. Right. So this was a whole big, change. And I jumped at it because I'd seen the first series. In fact, they'd asked me to SP the first series and I couldn't. I was on something else. I loved the first series. I thought, wow, I think everybody else, that has opened my eyes to something completely and utterly different that we've never seen inside hospitals before. And it was recommissioned very, very quickly by the BBC. It hadn't even finished going out. So we were back into the same trust. And they wanted 4 more episodes to go out, bang, 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 bang. So I was lucky. I think I was riding on the back of, the incredible trust that the hospital had, been courageous enough to place in the first group of people who made it. And when they'd seen the reaction and they'd seen these films going out and the press had absolutely loved them and it had incredible viewing figures, I think they felt minded that, yes, absolutely, we want to go again. And there's still much more to tell. So I was very lucky in that sense. Now that luck was sorely tested 3 days into the shoot, because then it was the Westminster Bridge terror attack, and being one of the 4 major trauma centres in London, it received a number of casualties from that, including the attacker. So, that was a birth of fire.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but in a sense, in terms of it made the next series in a way, because it was and also there was a tight turnaround on them, wasn't there? So you filmed them and then they went out how much later? I mean, weeks it was in case that series, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were always tied to a TX.
Yeah.
So it literally, we shot them.
Yeah.
We went into edit. The edits were timed to finish with, a couple of days post or whatever it was, and then you TX'd it. Yeah. So there was no messing about. You could not fail, i.e. you couldn't run over. Yeah. You couldn't, which actually was a hugely good discipline, I have to say. But what was really good is that, the BBC and the commissioners, and they were brilliant. People like Danny Horan was on that series, second series. He was on the first series as well. But they were great at decision making and saying, right, we go with this, we don't go with that, because they knew they couldn't run over either. You can't miss a TX slot. So it was an incredibly pressurized environment. It really helped to produce, I think, some good films. You made a film, you got feedback at the appropriate moments, it locked, it went to post and it went out, and that was that. I mean, apart from, the odd legal issue, and sometimes that had to be, smoothed out and quickly sorted out, but they still all hit. We never missed a TX.
But also the fact that what you had just made was so relevant to this moment in time was the other big feature of it. I mean, not only did it go under the bonnet, so to speak, but it went under the bonnet right now.
I think that was key. Absolutely key to it. And again, I'm sorry, I don't know whether that was part of the initial discussion, but I think the fact that it locked to TX, it locked in and it went out as quickly as we possibly could, meant that you were watching it in the here and now, which was brilliant.
It was like in real time, wasn't
it? You weren't watching something that happened a year ago or 2 years ago. You were watching the NHS just a couple of months ago, that kind of thing, 3 months ago, which in terms of some of the big things like COVID, that dreadful terror attack, things like that, I think had a real impact with the audience because they knew that they were watching something that only just happened and which humans were grappling with only a couple of months ago. And that was really important.
Yeah, and I think the biggest I suspect the biggest, most consumed content right now is the news cycle around the world. I mean, partly because it's so available to us, but also because it's just so bonkers that truth is just constantly stranger than fiction. So if you can produce something which gets behind the scenes of that rolling news footage in a way, then you're, in this modern age of constant kind of social media, you're in a great position because you're tagging on to something that people are interested in and care about of the moment. And the other sort of element of the current news cycle is that it peaks and then it vanishes and you don't hear anything more about it. And you look at the stories, like I always remember the one, do you remember when Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby jumped the queue for the Queen's funeral? Yes. And at the time it was just massive and it was just this huge explosion. Yeah. And then just vanished overnight, literally, and something else came along. So if you're not there to take the opportunity of it, it's very hard to get it out amongst the kind of medley of everything, isn't it?
Totally. I mean, I think some of those episodes you could have never done unless you'd been there at the moment. I mean, the obvious examples are COVID and the terror attack, but even that the episode you're talking about, kind of that looked at private versus public provision of healthcare. It was a moment in time. It was a real moment in time, where people who had very serious conditions that there was no known cure for particularly were really grappling with this sudden, kind of, can I get stuff on? Should I trust it? Do I do private stuff? I'm going to have to pay for it. And I remember that scene where the patient in question's wife goes to pay, and this was directed by a brilliant PD called Tim Lawton, and he followed her down to the little hatch in the basement where you pay, and she got her credit card out, and it was £5,000 or £6,000 for that one dose, whatever it was. And I think that really crystallized things for people sitting on their couch at home going, blimey, that stuff isn't available. I couldn't pay for that. I mean, they were mortgaging up to the hilt to get him that treatment. Yeah. And it was experimental and it wasn't available on the NHS. So, I hope, and that was also, something that we try to do in each episode, was ask some questions about how do we proceed with healthcare in this country? Look how it might be seen to be a little bit, say, they're unequal. For example, is this the route we want to go down, or do we want to? But then on the other hand, the NHS can't provide this treatment right now. So I hope we ask some questions with it.
Definitely.
And strove not to give answers, but hopefully said to people.
I think it was open-ended, but I think what it did as well, which is highly unusual, I think, for certainly a kind of a very well-observed observational documentary, is it? But which you might find more in, I don't know, factual entertainment proposition, is it made the audience ask themselves, what would I do in that situation? But ultimately, when you're watching, I don't know, Race Across the World, what would I do? Would I get the ferry or would I get the bus? Whereas in this, you're thinking, well, would I spend £10,000 for the experimental new treatment that's completely untested, or would I trust the such and such to do it in a different way? And so essentially, these are kind of what would you do with your life, and so it's the ultimate stakes that are being presented. And no, I don't mean that in a sort of facile way, like a sort of, it wasn't whimsical at all. It was like genuinely, if you are in this situation, these are real life or death decisions that you would have to make, and they involve money and they involve loved ones and they're very tangible. They're not like to DIY. Would I buy a chateau and do it up in France? Well, no, I probably wouldn't. Would I?
Well, I'd love to buy a chateau, but I'm not sure I want to do DIY.
It's a more pleasurable thing to contemplate, isn't it? Whereas with this one, it posed life or death questions, and that was very, very kind of grounding.
I hope so. And from that point of view, nobody had the answer. His oncologist didn't have the answer either.
Right. The experts don't know, which is even more. He didn't know
whether, he wasn't particularly convinced that treatment was going to work and whether he should be spending money on it. But he said, I'm not in your position. I can't make that decision. It is down to you, but there are no guarantees. And he took the clinician also talks about, there being a lot of snake oil salesmen out there, on the web. And this guy was like 12 hours a day trying to find treatments. But possibly you would, possibly I would. Yeah. It's asking you that question, isn't it? What would you do? And I hope that a lot of the A lot of the episodes, I hope, did ask those kind of questions.
I'm sure, yeah.
Try and put yourself in the position of both the hospital staff, the hospital managers, and also the patients.
Yeah.
See it from all those points.
Yeah, and again, I think it really helped with that attitude that people go into the NHS with, which is that the experts are there to provide me with the answers, and if they don't provide me with the answers, somehow they're doing their job wrong, which of course is not true. The experts are there to do their very best to give you the best possible treatment, but ultimately they may only be able to provide you with a series of options, and that you have to choose them yourself. And ultimately, though it's very hard to know this, nobody is coming to save you. That's the ultimate thing. If you are in the situation, the only person who can actually make these decisions is going to be down to you. And decision making is often really uncomfortable for lots of people. And so it's like really grabs, right?
I think it's very visceral.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think, Imperial, the Healthcare Trust, did some kind of qualitative, anecdotal study after the 2 series had gone out. And one of the things they found was that complaints dropped massively. To the trust, full stop, after these films, all the films in the series of their series had gone out. And I think that really says a lot about people perhaps understanding more about the challenges of healthcare. And like you say, there aren't necessarily clear answers, and there aren't necessarily right answers, and there are huge queues, and there are very difficult decisions to be taken. And yes, you have to advocate for yourself, but perhaps not to the detriment of everybody else. Everybody's got to have a little share of this cake. So how do we share it out? And I think, I'm thinking across so many different episodes. I'm thinking to ones in Liverpool where we were at the Liverpool Women's and Children's Hospital. Same there. They were facing some really drastic resource cutting and financial difficulties. And, we were in the boardroom with them when they were trying to make decisions about, well, what do we cut? What do you cut at a women's and children's hospital? Really, really specific hospital for women and children in Liverpool and Merseyside, only one of its kind. How do you cut back? Really tricky. Do you merge with another hospital? Then you lose your identity. Then do women lose? What do you do? Because you haven't got all the facilities on site. Really big questions that they, again, allowed us in. And I think what happened was, as each series went out, when we approached a new trust, most of them were really keen to have us in.
They were, yeah.
Yeah, because one, they'd also realised that they could showcase the brilliance of what they do. Two, they spoke to Imperial and they spoke to the other trusts that had been involved, and they got good feedback, But they also realised, back to the point I made earlier, that they could show the public just how complicated it really is and how decision-making in these situations is really hard. I won't say it wasn't challenging to make.
One of the other brilliant things about the show is that although it was done very quickly, fast turnaround, not long time in the edits, etc., when you watch it, it feels like it has been very, very patiently observed. It doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel hurried. It doesn't feel like, and there's no sort of really dodgy camera work or anything like that. It feels like a lot of time and thought has gone into like teasing the emotion, teasing the feelings out of this, getting the right understanding of what the person is going through, and also it reminded me a bit. Do you remember Coppers on Channel 4, which was a brilliant show that kind of didn't go to the same extent that Hospital does with the police, but it was pushing into the same area, and so you'd have all these things going on, and then you'd see two officers buying chocolate from the chocolate machine, and they would be choosing, do you want a Mars bar or do you want some Maltese, and there'd be some little joke or something like that, and it would just be these very beautifully observed moments of humanity amongst this incredible life or death drama, and I mean, the other one I was saying to Ros earlier, I was talking about the patient from episode 2 who has got a brain tumor, and he's got a lovely wife, and he goes into the operating theatre and he has this operation, and he's had a number of operations now, and every time he wakes up from the operation, his wife is standing there, bless her heart, worried about him, and he would pretend that she was someone different just to kid her. So he'd be like, oh, Dawn, my sister. And she'd be like, no. Oh no, he's been damaged in the operation. And I got you like this every time. And you just think those moments of observed humanity amongst these incredible life determining operations, the observation that was amazing. How was that achieved so effectively? Was there a secret sauce to that? Was it just great PDs, or was it
great
briefing?
PDs, great team? I would say. I always think, making documentaries, factual, unscripted, whatever we're supposed to call it now. I always think it is teamwork. There is no I. It is all about a fantastic team.
Yeah.
We had a kind of literally a briefing room. We were open 24/7, if you like. We were there kind of moving things around. It was a bit like, the war cabinet in the Second World War. We only had, 3 or 4 PDs with an AP and researcher each, and they were covering a number of hospitals and covering a number of people. So we had to make really brutal decisions about, okay, that surgeon's got a great list coming up. Let's see if he can ask a couple of those patients. You really had to drill down very, very quickly to find great stories. Surgeons often were brilliant. They were on our side, as were nurses, etc., who were saying to us, well, I've got this patient who might be really interested. I don't know if you'd be interested in them, blah, 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 which is how we found that gentleman that you're talking about with the brain tumour. Making decisions that you never knew would come to any, you stick someone with, the classic is in that series, the first episode, which is the London Westminster Bridge terror attack. I'd sent a PD and her AP off to film a really boring recruitment meeting, and they were cursing me. It was about nurse recruitment, and how difficult it was becoming, and how many staff they were missing across this huge trust, and this was becoming really hard. They were cursing me until they sat in this meeting, and every single staff member's phone went beep, 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 and they all got an alert, kind of basically incoming. There's been something's happened in central London, and they immediately turned the TV on, went to the TV news, realised it was something huge, and scarpered out of this room. And she had the nous to stick with the main head nurse and follow her into the ops room and follow it, literally see it unfolding from there. So sometimes you had to take huge risks, and just send them off to something that looked really deadly. In the COVID specials, I can remember we were following one of the chief operating officers around when someone came up to her and said, we're going to run out of oxygen. We are running out of oxygen. I don't know what to do. Literally in real time. And then she was something like, no, neither do I. Okay, right, come on, let's go and do, let's get people together. Let's work out what we can do. And again, in real time. So really good team, really good communication, and a bit of luck.
So your 2 other executive producers, Lorraine and Simon, both of them brilliant creatives and storytellers. I guess that's why you need 3 of you, really, because it's such a monster to wrangle.
It is a monster to wrangle, and there are so many decisions to be made. And I have to say, having them there on that first series, the second series of the run, but the first series for me was just amazing. I learned so much. I learned so much working with them across the board, but I had people to turn to and go, what do I do now? Do I? Don't I? Shall I? And it is a huge monster triangle. And you've got 3 execs, an SP, an SD. You've got story producers. It still was quite a small team though. This sounds huge, but it wasn't. 4 PDs to shoot all this. My hat, is continually doffed to those people. They did incredible work across those series. It was also those classics. I know this will sound really trite, but it was the classics of good storytelling, which is finding brilliant characters and telling great stories with them, which I think, boring as it is across the board with anything, isn't it? Be it unscripted drama, whatever. And they had, for my pleasure, already found some great characters. We found some more, and we took the next series on, but Simon and Lorraine definitely knew how to cast good characters and knew how to tell stories and knew what would grab an audience, and having wrangled their way through that first series, late nights in the edit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they really knew what could work and what couldn't work.
So to go back to the terrorist attack one again. So, because I just think that's such an interesting story. So you'd sent this team to cover an HR meeting and then all the pages went off and then the PD followed said, when did you find out what was going on, and how did you then manage that? Because it was a 24-hour, well, it was longer than that, but did you stay up 24 hours, or how did it work?
God, that's a podcast in itself. I tell you, that whole episode will never, ever, ever, to my dying day, leave my brain. Literally, as they were herring after the head of nursing into the ops room, where, they knew already, and all the major players that we had as characters were sorting out, like, who's gold command, who's silver command, who's bronze, how many are we getting, what should we do, what do we shut down? The AP texted us and said, and also my SP, Tom Curry at the time, he'd seen a news report. So almost instantaneously, we knew that something very, very big was happening, but we had no idea whether it would come our way. My biggest concern at that point was, whatever it is, are they going to continue to let us film? Because yes, but we've only been filming for this third day of filming. Yeah, third day of filming. Yes, they trusted us from the first series, etc., etc. But if this is really big, they can throw us out like that. So Lorraine and Simon weren't there. I was there. Everybody went off into. I had two of my teams were over at the Hammersmith, which wasn't a major trauma centre. So I had to get them back in a cab really quickly because I knew that would come to St Mary's because major trauma centre, and it was equidistant to, I think, King's, which was the other major trauma. Of course, London goes into gridlock. I'm struggling to get them back. I've only got literally 2 shooting people, I'm trying to find the head of comms. She's saying, go ahead. It's cool. Keep going. Until I tell you otherwise, keep going. We're okay with this. And I have this, it isn't funny, I know, but I do have this vivid image. I went out, St Mary's is based along a big canal, a Paddington Basin, and there's a bridge over the Paddington Basin. And by this point, already there were armed police at the entrance to the emergency department. I passed this huge burly beast with a big gun. I went out onto this. And I was leaving all these messages. I couldn't get hold of anyone. I left messages for Lorraine, for Simon, for the legal department at the BBC, for Danny Horn. I can't remember. I just called everybody and said, help! We're in the middle of quite a large thing here.
Yeah. Guess what?
And at the moment, we're still in here. But could someone please call me back? Yeah. Just tell me whether you want me to continue or not. I kind of knew I had to continue. But, when you're like, slightly vibrating on a different level. And in fact, there's a fleeting shot of me in the A&E department sat in a row of chairs because they shut down to everything else. They diverted everything else. And there's a shot of me with 2 phones, one to this ear and one to this ear, whilst I'm trying to wrangle. And the police tried to throw us out, and all credit to the trust. They said, nope, they're staying. They've got our permission to be in this hospital. They're here filming. They're staying. So it just unfolded in front of our eyes, and we just had to we got the people back from Hammersmith. We had 4 crews, and we just shot until we dropped. And then at about, I don't know, maybe we stopped about 1 a.m. the following day, something like that. We were still there. And then we suddenly had this awful feeling of my God, we've got all these rushes. And this is all kind of quite important, and there might be evidence in here. And we also knew that we had filmed the attacker themselves coming in. So I can remember Lorraine getting on the phone and trying to find a security firm who would come and guard the office with the rushes in it that night, because we suddenly thought, sugar, we have a lot of very emotional, very vulnerable patients, plus the attacker. And if this got into the wrong hands, any of this footage, we can't just kind of lock up and go home, and then we debriefed everybody, and we made sure that, there was support on, on hand, and kind of, I don't know, staggered at home at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Wow.
Just, yeah.
And did the footage have to go into disclosure for the police?
So they did try and get me to just hand the footage over, and I was having none of it. And they tried for a long time, over the ensuing shoot and the edit. But eventually we came to an agreement that they could come and look at the bit that the only piece that they were interested in, which had to do with the perpetrator. So that was all right. So they came to the edit and watched it. So we didn't have to go, anywhere close to them seeing anything else, because our argument was, well, everything else is, it needs consent, and you don't have their consent. These are all people that have been injured. And it's confidential.
Yeah. No, I've been through the exact same process myself. So one of the questions I always ask people, and I'm really interested to know your responses based on that extraordinary experience that you've just detailed of when the terrorist attack happened and where you're at and so forth, is how you deal with stress in those situations, and how you deal with that kind of huge demand for excellent decision making under extreme pressure. And like you were saying, you're trying to, as anyone would have done, whether it was the owner of the company, whether you try and get hold of other people, particularly at the broadcaster, to try and help you make the right decisions. And for a while you couldn't get hold of anyone, then you could, and all that kind of stuff. What some people find that very uncomfortable doing that. How do you deal with those kind of things?
Well, that's a really good question. How do I deal with it? I think I always kind of balance between the two. I'm always kind of sitting on that edge of, okay, I know we need to film this, but at the same time, I want to be fair to everybody and I don't want to be intrusive. So I'm always trying to balance that, which is really hard. And that's where the most stress comes from. Also looking after my team. I don't want my team put in situations. I mean, obviously that day they were going to see, and they did see, some pretty awful things. So you're always worrying about them as well. And I think that's why I did that massive ring round, because I thought, there's only so much one person can do on this. I do need support. We're stretched really thinly here. And so it was brilliant that, Lorraine came down, I think Simon came down, everybody, turned up, and we could just work it together. And I think that's the best thing. Just find somebody else, run all those things through people and through your team, and work with your team, because you just can't do it alone. And I think that's where, if you do try, that's where bad decision making and a lot of stress can really catch you out, actually. I used to cycle from where I lived in London down there, and I can remember cycling home in the wee small hours, along the canal, thinking, this is probably a bit crazy, who's out here? But also that's a good way to de-stress at the end of such a day. But I do think it's about communicating with others, and you can't carry it all yourself. And that is easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's about, I think about two things, and you just said them, and I'm really just saying something again, but it's about asking for help. And never feeling like you have to carry it all yourself. And it's also about getting other people's perspectives on the situation that you're trying to deal with. And you might not necessarily agree with what they're saying, but sometimes if what they're saying might confirm what you believe. And there's been situations where I've asked people's opinions, and they've all said, some of them might have said, I do it this way. And I thought, no, that's not the right decision. But I now know that I'm making the right decision because I've looked at their perspective on it, and it doesn't add up in my mind. And I can only ever go on what I think to be the right decision.
The bottom line is someone's got to make a decision, but it's good to do it with knowledge and with information and with team support and running it past people. Someone does have to make a decision, and I think that's where it's kind of experience, isn't it? And I always say to people, look, it's better to make a decision than none at all, because then we'll be willy wonkering around. We don't know what we're doing. Yeah. And sometimes that's a wrong decision, and you have to take responsibility for that. And that can be hard, but it's better to make a decision and let's move on than it is keep going, I don't know. And that is hard. I don't think I'm the most decisive person in my own personal life. Somehow, maybe I just transform in my working life. Super
Jackie.
Decision making.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
But you do, especially in unscripted, when you've got that kind of stuff unfolding right in front of your eyes, and it's like, do I go right? Do I go left? Do I go straight ahead? Do I go backwards? I don't know. Right, okay, let's go left. Oh shit, I should go left. Oh no, we're going left. Let's do it. Let's do it. But you've also got to have the courage to say if you've gone wrong.
Yeah.
And that's a tricky one as well, I think, sometimes. And say, really sorry, guys. I'm really sorry. That was a bad decision. Let's go this way.
Yeah.
Let's do something different. I think we should dump that and we should do this instead.
Yeah.
And they're always like this. They're always 50-50, aren't they, sometimes?
But every team needs someone at the head of it who is going to make a decision And that is the most important thing. And as you say, if you make the wrong decision, you make the wrong decision. But if you don't make a decision, the team will just kind of collapse around you because they don't know what direction they're going in. And even if it's the wrong one, at least they're going in a direction as a group. And then you can change course when you realize it's the wrong decision. And I think there's an adage, isn't there, which sometimes the cost of not making a decision is greater than making the wrong decision. And so therefore it's kind of a win-win. If you make the wrong decision is always better. Well, often better than not making a decision at all. And so therefore make the decision, right?
Definitely. And, I couldn't have done that series without the support of like Lorraine and Simon and the SP and the SD and people around me. That was one hell of a series to come onto, fast turnaround with that happening in the middle of it as your first exec. It was
first exec role as well.
First exec role. It was a bit of a birth of fire. I mean, God knows how they, I was amazed when they said, would you like to come back and do the next series? I was like, oh my God, it can't have been that bad.
No, it was an excellent piece of television. Did you feel like I was talking to the guy who did the 2012 Olympics and similarly, I think, to what you've just described. So he would kind of, prep for this kind of exceptionally difficult period of time where he was just, all he ever really thought about was the 2012 Olympics. And then suddenly it's over. And you drop off the edge of a cliff and you kind of think, what just happened? Did you have that?
Oh, God, yeah, absolutely. What that night I had it, let alone for the whole series. You just get to a point, don't you? I don't know whether you get this, but, at the end of doing a really, really intense piece of work and you've all worked together like a team and you see them much more than your own family and they are your family and it finishes and then suddenly you go off in your different directions, don't you? And it's like, and you just, I always find, I can only speak for myself, but I know others have said to me they feel the same way. I literally hit the wall, slide down it into a heap at the bottom, get every illness under the sun, feel really depressed, miss the team, and then have to kind of work my way back out of that. You can guarantee. I think it's so intense and you run on so much adrenaline. And God, I'm not trying to say I'm doing anything spectacular here. I'm not saving lives like the people I'm filming in hospital. At all. But it is such an intense period of work. It's such a pressurized capsule that you work in the sense that it would have been anyway, but to run to TX days, it's already gone in the magazines and it's already in the schedules.
Yeah, there are those scary moments, aren't there, when you're in an edit suite and you look at the Radio Times or you look at the thing and it says your show is on air at 8 o'clock and you're looking at it there and right then and you're just thinking, yeah, it's like twice as long as it needs to be. I don't know how I'm going to bridge these certain gaps. And you think, how am I going to get between where it's at now and where apparently it needs to be by this time next week for millions of people to watch?
You do. And you just, on those series, God, the number of nights, and Lorraine and I still joke about the number of nights we had, we were in the edit suites, often at the farm just across the road almost, with noodles at like 1 a.m. in the morning from whatever takeaway was still available, still gunning at it because you had to get it out on time. It was incredibly pressurized. The episode that you mentioned right at the start of this, the second episode of the second series, had to be TX Live because we had a very late legal query by Big Pharma, which the BBC and everybody else was saying we can't stand, we daren't stand this up. You got to take that out. And so we had, that's the only episode that nearly, and it was squeaky bum time. It had to go to one of these places around here in Soho and it had to be TX Live and they had to press the button on the dot of 9 o'clock. Yeah.
So what? So I don't understand, why did they have to TX it live though?
Because we couldn't make the changes quick enough to get it back.
To redeliver it. And
I must admit, that's the one night I thought, I can't watch this. I just can't watch this. It did go out fine. But those were some of the kind of experiences of doing something like that.
I did a police one called An Hour to Catch a Killer. Trevor McDonald in like 2016 or something like that, and that was complex, which is a murder and it was all that kind of stuff. And when I watched it go out, I was aware that there was potentially, and you do watch and you think, dear God, please. Anyway, there'd been so many changes. I'd actually been in it for 20 weeks. Very painful show for all sorts of reasons. And I do remember watching it going out, kind of thinking, dear God, please let it be.
God, it's a roller coaster of stress. You want to talk about how do you deal with stress? I must admit, I think I had a large double gin and tonic in the bar beforehand.
Yeah. What is this life I've chosen?
Really, at that point, like, what?
So you've done sort of 5 series, and you had, hit the zeitgeist and had so well, particularly with the terrorist attack, which was so of the moment. And actually, I think we forget now, but there was a period from about 2012 to about 2022 when the terrorist threat, I mean, it's tailed off in the last few years, seemingly, but over that time, it was very, very present in people's imaginations, and there was all the things that were going on in Syria with ISIS and all that kind of stuff and so forth. So it was very much of the moment. COVID comes, and Hospital is the series which talks about the struggles in the NHS. I mean, arguably COVID is the hardest test in the NHS, already an embattered service. How do you go about covering that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we were actually editing in the edit with the second series out of Liverpool. So this was 4th, 5th series anyway, something like that. Lorraine and I talked about, there's this thing coming. Obviously, we had no idea.
There's this thing.
Apparently
it's a pandemic.
Apparently a pandemic, like everybody else, we were somewhat in the dark, but we thought, well, we're in the NHS. Woohoo! We're in Liverpool. They've got the hospital, the school for tropical medicine. If this really is like something quite nasty, then we should kind of do something about it. We spoke to Liverpool. They obviously had a lot more information than we did, and they were like, I think they knew what was coming. So Lorraine said to me, well, why don't you give NHS England a ring? They don't exist anymore, NHS England. Right. But anyway, so I gave our press contact there a ring, thinking, this is a bit silly, but anyway, I'll give it a go. And she said, well, I don't know if it's going to be anything or not, but let me have a chat, let me have a word round. Anyway, she called me back and she said, our place is not that keen because I just don't know what it's going to be, but I've got the Royal Free in London. They might be interested. We did have a chat. Royal Free, again, very courageously, because they have a big tropical medicine school as well, and they know what they're doing, said, yeah, come on in. So we planned to go and film about COVID. What we didn't anticipate was Boris Johnson then saying, right, we're going to lock down. I can remember ringing Lorraine and Joe, our head of production, going, are we going in tomorrow? And they made a few calls to the Royal Free, and they said, yeah, come in. We had nothing. I mean, at that point, it's hard to remember, but no one was wearing masks at this point. I think Jo got some gloves and a few masks from her local hairdresser, her nail bar. We had these. We had absolutely nothing. We knew nothing. But they were only wearing really full-on PPE in intensive care. Elsewhere in the hospital, everybody was still walking around. No masks, no nothing, because that wasn't, And so we dived in, and it became very, very apparent from that first day of lockdown that there was an incredible and awful story unfolding in front of us. There were already huge amounts of people in their intensive care. They were already talking about extending it, oxygen supplies, etc., how are we going to treat people, We stopped filming after 3 weeks because we thought, well, we've got to edit this and we've got to get it out. Because again, the whole point of hospital was it needs to go out as quick as possible. It has to be of the moment. I mean, I and a producer were running around the hospital setting stuff up. But, the people who shot it, they were the ones going in full PPE, absolutely boiling into intensive care. They were the ones dealing with the incredibly emotional situations face to face. They were doing a fantastic job, and in a situation where we knew nothing. We didn't know what this thing was. Nobody knew. No one knew how to treat it apart from, intensive care, lots of oxygen, lots of drugs, let's hope for the best kind of thing. Then we had to edit it. And of course, we couldn't edit it anywhere, so we had to edit at home. And when it came to comm record, our brilliant comm artist, she was living in Suffolk at that point. So she borrowed some of her brother, I think he was a DJ or a sound recorder, borrowed some of her kit, got under a duvet, recorded all the I mean, we just were making it up as we kind of went along.
It was nuts making stuff in 2020, wasn't it? I mean, it was like DIY.
It was DIY
TV.
Everything. And you were ringing up people going, well, can we do this remotely? And you never forget doing stuff like that, do you?
No. Well, you are in the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
I mean, on both those two instances. I mean, I've been near to a number, in the proximity of a number of terrorist incidents when they've happened, like 9/11 and the Soho bomb and all this kind of stuff. And when you are in the eye of that storm, it's an incredibly, and you are the focal point of, and it has all these sort of ripples that go out that everybody else is experiencing and the news is picking up, but you were there, or you are in the middle of it. And it's just it's a deeply, deeply cathartic and not in a sort of good way experience.
No, it's a deeply visceral experience.
Very visceral, yeah.
And it's really deeply moving, deeply upsetting, but incredibly kind of prescient. You feel like you're right in the center of it. And there were incredible moments in the filming which got into the edit where things that really brought it home. And I can remember this being talked about by people and in the press, and that you've done the right thing. You've brought home how awful this thing was. Things like one of the brilliant PDs went and filmed a nurse who went into one of the storage offices, like they'd had to turn this, and it was full of either suitcases or just plastic bags of people's belongings. And it was people who'd come in and been on a ward and then been shipped to the intensive care unit, and their stuff was just there. And she said, I don't know if they've survived. I don't know if they're still with us. I don't know who they are. I don't know. And it was just full, absolutely full of this. And it just really brought home, this is huge, and it's affecting people personally and deeply every single day, and people are dying every single day, and these brave people are trying to save them. I hope that it brought home a time in history that was... Hope we'll never see again. I suspect we will, unfortunately. But to be there in it and to be making it, my hats go off to the whole team. I mean, it was...
and yourself. I mean, I think... what was going on was akin to something, it was probably the biggest thing since World War II in terms of the population, the emergency services, the responses that we need, the kind of decision making, the life or death element, the mass death, like stuff. And hospital was literally documenting that as it happened at the heart of it. I mean, it's you were very much a front row on history.
We were, and I feel very kind of honoured and privileged to have had that. Actually,
and then brought it to us.
And all kudos to the hospital again for letting us be there and letting us film it, and to the clinicians who let us film them in the most trying of circumstances.
Well, Jackie, I just want to say thank you. We're starting work together, and I've now really heard chapter and verse all your experiences on hospitals. I'm slightly nervous about what happens in our medical program now, based on the fact that whenever
hopefully
you're involved,
no COVID,
there's some kind of insanely complex thing happens. So, but touch wood, it'll all be fine. But this has been so nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
I really
Ed.
appreciate
It's been lovely to talk to you.
It's been good.
Relive it.
Television has many different roles in our life, depending on the genre. If it's entertainment, it might be that it takes us away from our problems for 45 minutes and it makes us laugh. If it's specialist factual, it might incite curiosity or intrigue, or we learn something new about something we didn't know before. What I think you get with Hospital as an observational documentary is access into the very key point of humanity, which essentially is life or death. These aren't whimsical decisions. These aren't sort of, maybe I'd like to go and open a house in France, or maybe I'd like to go to Miami, or maybe I'd own a dog, or whatever it might be. This is about how do you make decisions which can determine the length of your life, or whether you can walk again, or all these different things. And they are the decisions of people who are put in extraordinarily difficult positions. Around that are the people who are trying to help them with those decisions or make them better. They equally are bound by complex rules of money, which, ideally they wouldn't be, but they are. Space, time, resources, all these different things. And what Hospital did brilliantly was married those two perspectives up in a way which was just deeply compelling, deeply affecting television that really got to the heart, I think, of what it means to be a human oneself.